I don't think pansexuality is a real thing. Now, before any of you leave a nasty comment in the comment section or leave a dislike, please hear me out. So, pansexuality is sort of the, I guess you could say, additional preference sort of added to the whole LGBT spectrum. And there's really a lot different from it than any of the other sexualities. Now, I'm not going to talk about stuff like omnisexuality or polysexuality or stuff like that because that sort of kind of just roots into everything else I'm going to talk about. But pansexuality to me doesn't feel as, for lack of a better term, legitimate as the other sexualities. Now, let's break this down. We have heterosexuality, homosexuality, asexuality, and bisexuality. Heterosexuality is the sexual attraction to someone of the opposite sex. Simple enough. Majority of the population is heterosexual, and that's a good thing because if we didn't have heterosexuals, then our species would diminish. Now, homosexuality, or just gay for short, is the sexual attraction to people of the same sex. So, if a male and a male find each other attractive sexually, or their bodies attractive sexually, then they're homosexual. Same with females and females. Asexuality is, from what I understand, having the lack of the ability to have sexual attraction. Like, I don't know, there's so many different definitions to asexuality now that I'm not even sure what it means, but I'm just going with the overall definition that everyone seems to agree with asexuality meaning that you have no sexual attraction. So you're not attracted to males or females. And then bisexuality, because this is where the issue comes in when pansexuality is brought up. A lot of people conflate bisexuality and pansexuality, and a lot of people, particularly pansexuals themselves, really seem to have an issue with this. And they say that bisexuality and pansexuality aren't the same thing. And they're kind of right, because while bisexuality is real, pansexuality isn't. And this is why I feel that pansexuality isn't as quote-unquote legit. So bisexuality is the sexual attraction to both males and females. So you can be attracted to anyone, any person, because the people who tell you, or more likely to tell you, that pansexuality and bisexuality are different, also believe that sex and gender are different, and that there are multiple genders. And without getting into that, we're just gonna stick to the premise of that bisexuality and pansexuality are different, and sex and gender are different. Now, sexuality is determined by what sex you find sexually attractive, not gender. So, if someone who is straight is sexually attracted to a woman, it's because they're female, and not because they're a woman, if that makes sense. Sexuality, in terms of bisexuality and pansexuality, seem to differentiate due to preferences or lack thereof. I've asked many people their definition of pansexuality, and they tell me that pansexuality is the sexual attraction to someone regardless of their gender identity. Now, gender identity and sex are two different things, according to most people. I'm pretty sure most people will agree that gender identity and sex are two different things. Now, if you're attracted to someone, regardless of their gender identity, that means that they are still either male or female, because gender and sex are different, right? So if gender and sex are different, and everyone is either male or female, and intersex exists, but it's such a minute percentage of the population that I'm gonna leave it out of the equation for now. But if you're attracted to someone regardless of their gender identity, that means you have the potential to be attracted to both males and females. And the definition of bisexuality is a sexual attraction to both males and females. So by definition, if you are pansexual, you are bisexual, because you have no preference in regards to gender. And this is a big thing because a sexual preference and a sexuality aren't the same thing. For me personally, no matter, even if I wanted to, I could never see myself being sexually attracted to a girl or a woman or someone who is feminine presenting. I am not attracted to females. And it's females in the terms of sex and maybe like a male person presenting as a female. I could not see myself in a sexual relationship with them. Not at all. And that is not something that I prefer. Like, I'm not saying I prefer males, but I will date females. I'm saying that I physically can't be sexually attracted to females, is what I'm saying. Meanwhile, a sexual preference is more akin to like a fetish or something like that. Like, for example, if a straight man were to date a fat woman and he was like a chubby chaser, then he would prefer fat women. He would prefer larger women, plus-size women. That's a sexual preference because he is still able to be sexually attracted to not as large women, but he prefers fat women. And pansexuality is sort of like the reverse of that, where you can be attracted to anyone and you don't have a particular preference in regards to gender. Most people, I believe, do have a preference in terms of gender. If you believe that, and we're going on the premise of gender and sex are two totally different things. So if gender and sex are two totally different things, most people have a sexual preference in regards to gender. Straight people tend to want to date people whose gender identity matches with their biological sex. So if a man wanted to date a female, he would also prefer that that female is feminine presenting, so like, a regular girl. But bisexual people, because they're attracted to both sexes, there's sort of leeway in there for an incongruence in biological sex and gender identity. And that's where I feel like pansexual people fit. They're not actually, pansexual isn't an actual sexuality, it's a lack of preference in terms of gender identity. And so it can't really be considered a sexuality in and of itself, because it checks all the marks that bisexuality does, if that makes sense. Pansexuality is literally just, and I know this might sound rude, but pansexuality, in a way, is literally just like, like low standards bisexuality, because bisexuals usually want to date someone who is, well, I don't know if they do or not, because I'm not bisexual myself, but one would think bisexual people, if they're dating a man or a woman, then they would want to date someone who identifies as the gender that they present themselves as, right? Pansexuals don't care about this, but they're still bisexual, because if gender and sex are different, and gender identity and gender are completely independent from sex, then you can date someone like who identifies as non-binary or is transgender, but they'd still be biologically male or female. And this isn't like an argument, because we have biological proof to prove whether or not someone is male or female. So does gender identity just override someone's biological sex? Is that how it works for pansexual people? I'm not sure. It doesn't really make any sense, because regardless of their gender identity, they're still either male or female. And if you're willing to date both of them, then the term bisexuality defines your sexuality, because you're attracted to both sexes. I don't know. Leave a comment, because I might be really confused about it. If it makes sense, I'll make a follow-up video, and if it doesn't, I'll make a follow-up video. This really doesn't make sense in itself. I don't know, maybe people just want to diversify the LGBT spectrum, for lack of a better term, and I don't know, it doesn't make sense, because you can't believe that sex and gender are two different things, and then also think that pansexuality and bisexuality are two different things. And you can't also think that gay people don't choose to be gay, while also thinking that pansexuality is a sexuality, because it's a preference, or lack thereof. It's rooted in a preference. And when it comes to sexuality, you don't prefer one thing or the other, because no one chooses their sexuality. Sexuality isn't a preference. And pansexuality's identity as pansexual is based on a preference, or lack of a preference. So it can't be a legitimate sexuality. I don't mean any offense to anyone who identifies as pansexual, but if you do get offended, I don't know what to tell you. Because I'm not gonna, not bring this up, because I might be afraid that I offend someone. I don't know. This wasn't scripted. If you can't tell, it's just me rambling on of something I was thinking about. It really doesn't make any sense. And hopefully some comments will be nice and give me their take on it and not yell, because I know people get really defensive about this sort of stuff, when really, if you just present something that makes sense and you can convince people to think the way you do. That's what I'm asking. Just convince me with something that makes sense. Because right now, the whole pansexuality thing, it really doesn't make sense.